He opened the door to find Karen, the HOA president, holding a fine in her hand. "Do you realize how loud you're playing?" she asked coldly. His music, his art, was now considered noise. But what happened next? Even the most seasoned have never seen anything like it. Let's start from the beginning. It was just another afternoon in the studio, the hum of my equipment and the pulse of the music filling the room as I worked on my latest track. As a Grammy-winning artist, music isn't just something I do. It's who I am. I was lost in the creative process, the notes flowing effortlessly when suddenly a sharp knock at the door interrupted my focus. I opened it to find Karen, the HOA president, standing in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her expression a mixture of annoyance and authority. "Do you have any idea how loud that music is?" she asked, her tone harsh and accusatory. "We've had complaints. You're disturbing the peace. We don't need this kind of noise around here." For a split second, I thought maybe she was just messing with me, but the cold fury in her eyes left no room for humor. She wasn't joking. She was dead serious. My music, the very thing I've dedicated my life to, the thing that's made me who I am, was being dismissed as mere noise. I couldn't believe it. I stood there frozen, trying to process the absurdity of it. This wasn't just a small inconvenience or a minor nuisance. This was an attack on my passion, my craft. How could she not understand? Music, real music, isn't something you just dismiss because it doesn't fit into someone's narrow idea of what's acceptable. The words caught in my throat, but inside I was boiling. This wasn't just about volume or neighbors. It was about respect for the art, for the life I've built. But instead of voicing that, I simply stared at her, wondering how this absurd encounter was going to unfold. Karen didn't budge. Her gaze was steely, almost triumphantly cold. She held up a piece of paper, waving it in front of me like a weapon. "You'll be fined," she said flatly, her voice laced with authority. I stared at the paper, disbelief flooding through me. A fine. For playing music. My music. I was too stunned to speak at first, the absurdity of it all crashing over me like a tidal wave. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. This was more than just noise. It was my art, my lifeblood, the very thing that had shaped me into who I was. And yet, here was Karen, the self-proclaimed sheriff of this tiny neighborhood, holding the power to destroy it all with a few cruel words. My neighbors, the ones who had no clue about the years of struggle and dedication I'd put into my craft, were now calling my passion a disturbance. Their shallow, ignorant judgment stung, but it was Karen's smug satisfaction that truly burned. As I stood there, trying to collect my thoughts, I became aware of the eyes on me. Neighbors peeked through their windows, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some whispered behind closed curtains. The weight of their gaze felt like 1,000 eyes boring into my skin. I was humiliated. Here I was, a Grammy-winning artist, caught in a battle with this petty HOA president, and everyone was watching. Everyone was judging. How had it come to this? How had this one small-minded woman with nothing more than a piece of paper and a petty sense of control managed to become the judge of my career, my life? I could feel my pulse quickening, the heat of anger rising in my chest, but I remained silent, knowing that any response would only give her more power. In that moment, I realized that Karen was no longer just a nuisance. She was a symbol of everything that misunderstood and undervalued me. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. This wasn't just some petty complaint. It was an attack on everything I had worked for. I couldn't let it slide. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm the raging fire in my chest, and then, without thinking twice, I stepped forward. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" I said, my voice trembling, a mix of fury and disbelief creeping into every word. It was hard to believe I even had to say it, but I couldn't let her walk all over me. "I'm a Grammy award-winning artist. The music you're calling a disturbance is the result of years of hard work, dedication, and recognition from the very industry you seem to think is irrelevant. And you're here, standing on my doorstep, trying to fine me for it? The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. Karen's face faltered, a brief flicker of doubt passing through her cold eyes. For a second, it looked like I'd caught her off guard. But that didn't last long. She quickly regained her composure, arms crossing tightly over her chest again. "I don't care who you are," she spat, the edge in her voice sharp and dismissive. "Rules are rules." That was it. That was the breaking point. I couldn't let this stand any longer. My jaw clenched, the anger now boiling over in me, but I knew I had to make her see reason, or at least make sure she knew she wasn't going to get away with this. "Then I guess it's time for me to educate you about those rules," I said, the words cold and biting. I turned sharply, heading back into the house. I needed to make this known. No more silence, no more backing down. I grabbed my phone from the counter, the reality of what I was about to do hitting me. I wasn't going to let her get away with bullying me. I wasn't just going to let her ruin my day. This was bigger than that. I hit record, steadying my hand as I aimed the camera toward the door. I was going to make sure the world saw exactly who the real problem was. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere, shared across social media, discussed in forums, and passed around like a hot topic. People couldn't believe what they were hearing, and the outrage was palpable. In no time, the comments flooded in, each one more furious than the last. I had become the symbol of defiance against the unreasonable power of Karen and her HOA. What had started as a personal battle quickly turned into a movement. Neighbors who had once sided with her, who had quietly accepted her rule, were now voicing their support for me. The tables had turned. Local news outlets couldn't resist picking up the story. Interviews with me were broadcasted on TV, while the video replayed over and over again, showing Karen's arrogance and my calm, collected response. The spotlight was no longer on her self-righteous crusade, but on the fact that I was standing up for my right to create, to express myself. The more people saw, the more they realized that I wasn't the villain she had tried to paint me as. She had miscalculated. By the end of the week, the HOA had no choice but to retract the fine. Not only that, but Karen was swiftly removed from her position as president. Her fall from grace was swift and deserved. The very authority she wielded to suppress others had crumbled under the weight of its own injustice. As I stood in my studio once more, the speakers hummed with the sounds of my latest track, the notes flowing freely into the room. There was a peace now, a clarity that hadn't been there before. The music felt different. It felt like a victory. The satisfaction of watching Karen's downfall wasn't about getting back at her, though. It wasn't about revenge. It was about knowing that sometimes standing your ground is the only way to restore balance. I had fought for my right to create, and in doing so, I had earned the freedom to make music in peace.